5 years now. It's 2021, and I started it back in 2014. Basically, what I'm getting at is I was featured on the GitHub ReadMe project that was sharing my story, and my story itself goes into like great detail. I don't really go into a lot of this. I don't really talk about like my family and stuff like that because I did a lot of that when I first started programming. But basically, if I could summarize the sort of beginning of my ReadMe project focus is this is my son. My son has been in the hospital. He was in the hospital for 70 days. He was born 11 weeks early. And at that time, I was actually in sales. I was working in sales full time, doing IT networking switches, basically selling that. And I was doing a good job. I actually got promoted twice in the same year that my son was about to be born. And kind of just like crushing it, killing it with the numbers. And my son was born. We were in the hospital for 11 weeks. And at that point, I realized you're only as good as your last month in sales. And I realized I didn't want to do sales anymore because I came back. I was crushing it before I went to the hospital with my son. And when I got back, like people cared. My coworkers cared, but my customers did not care.
Coffee's for closers only.
Like they were just sort of like, hey, why did you put it out of office? And it turns out when you're sort of life or death situations and you're rushing to the hospital with your wife, you just don't think of out of offices. And at that time, we had a firewall. We couldn't actually change our email to out of office remotely. So we actually had to go in the office to turn off my email and then send another one. So it was 2 weeks before I got back in the office to actually turn off my email and do it out of office. But by then, folks were upset because those 2 weeks they wanted to buy stuff from me and they ended up going with our competitors. Long story short, my son being born was the catalyst for me leaving full-time sales. And I get into this in the story itself, and I sort of had some pivotal moments. One being my son being born, and the other one being my mom passing away. And those two things kind of pushed me towards one, learning how to code, because I learned how to code while in the hospital, and then two, but I wanted to try something new, and that that sort of pushed me towards going to San Francisco and taking the job there. So if you're interested, definitely check out this sort of focus on the ReadMe project. We have a lot of really awesome stories. I find them more like I'm happy to share my story, and like I don't talk about my story a lot because I just feel like I did a lot of that when early in my career. If you go to the Code Newbies podcast, episode number 2, you'll hear me talking about my story as well on podcast form, and so definitely check it out. But what I'm getting at is I wanted to share that, and I wanted to share like where I came from, and like my focus was I was always super excited and super intrigued to learn. And that's sort of why I started this podcast. That's why I started live streaming. That's why I started writing blogs. I used to writing 2 or 3 blogs a week. When I got to Netlify, I was writing a blog every week for Netlify, just them. And I just love sharing what I learned like the day before. That's pretty much my goal. And that sort of like kind of ballooned me into eventually doing DevRel full time. And I've talked about it in my YouTube. I've talked about it in the streams. I've talked about it a lot about how I got to sort of developer relations. And when you read this story, you kind of understand sort of how I got to this point. I just always loved sort of just learning new things and like moving forward and advancing my knowledge. Writing code was always a side project for me. It was always like a thing I did on the weekends or the evenings or at night. And when I had the opportunity to do it full time, especially in San Francisco, I was like, yeah, let's just try this out. Like, again, my mom passing away was sort of like the catalyst for me to move to San Francisco. I don't recommend people to move San Francisco. I don't think it's actually as worth it as it used to be maybe 10 years ago. But nowadays, everything's remote. So like, see if you can get that job remote, or take a month and like maybe go to a couple events in like different cities or major cities just to make the networking, but then go back home and see if you can get that job remote. So also, today it's different because of COVID. So like obviously travel is going to be a lot different, but hopefully in the future, post vaccines and everything like that, once we figure all this out, that will be a different situation. So I say all that because I just want to recommend you I'm going to say this is probably the only time I'll probably point people to this ReadMe project unless it comes up in conversation on streams. But I just want to mention that because I was super happy to be a part of this project. I've been helping with this project in general since almost since the beginning. So I've been sort of consulting. I was a part of the announcement piece too as well when we started launching some of the initial stories with Henry Zhu. Actually, Henry Zhu of Babel, I think, was one of the earlier ones. Benji, I'm looking at Benji's face, and I know I've talked to Benji in person. For some reason I had stumbled on his face, but Benji, Gift is over here talking about her story as well. Like, there's so many awesome stories to learn about how folks sort of got into writing code, into development, into open source, that I can't see how this would not be inspirational for folks who are just getting started, folks who are looking to level up to the next thing. It's just a legit way to sort of just keep up to date with stories and sort of like take their experiences and like apply it to your situation. Like, obviously not everything Gift goes through or how she sort of leveled up in Nigeria is like a thing you can apply to yourself, but she put herself out there. She got really good mentorship through folks like Sarah Drasner, and she like covers that too in her posts. So highly recommend. Check out the ReadME project. Super honored to be featured. Super honored for. Also, shout out to Angie. Angie's got a great story too as well. Angie Jones.